All right, this is our intro video.
Yay,
We need an intro video song. Ladies and gentlemen, it's Vitalogy.
Yeah.
All right, that's it. Welcome to the Vitalogy podcast.
We might need to get an intro video.
We might need an intro video. We have a new intro graphic, though. If you're watching us on YouTube, you saw it. If you see it in your podcast feed, you saw a new graphic. The only bummer part is it has our faces on it.
I know.
But it is.
Hey,
it's good to be together.
They did well with what they had to work with. You know,
This is true. I just want to welcome everybody to the Vitalogy podcast. We're back on Facebook today, Facebook Live, and so if you're joining us on Facebook Live, please just say hi. Welcome. Thank you for passing it on. Tell a friend. All those things I think I'm supposed to say. That's what all the other people say, so I'm going to say it.
Yeah.
And but it's good to be back with you on a Vitalogy podcast. It's good to be back with you.
It's good to be back with you too, Josh.
I was telling someone walked into my office and saw this setup. Right, we're in my office. These are my bookshelves, and that there, of course, is the Vitalogy book behind me. And so Mike, I'm gonna say, I told him I'd say this. So Mike comes and he's like, what is this? You do a podcast here and it's called Vitalogy? He says, why don't you guys use words that normal people know?
Listen, people that like 90s rock do know that word.
They do. They may not catch the Latin meanings of the study of life necessarily.
No, they just think we talk about Pearl Jam all the time.
Yes, which maybe we should talk more and sing more Pearl Jam.
Yes.
You think? No. I'm okay with that, and you don't want that either. But we are talking about Vitalogy as a study of life, right? And we want to talk about vital signs of life abundant. We want to talk about the abundant life that we find in Christ and through the scriptures. And so we're going to dive into scriptures today. We're going to kind of look back at last week's sermon a little bit, but that's going to open up some doors. And I hope you just are along for the journey, because we'll see where it takes us.
Yep.
Right.
As always, send questions to questions@efcc.org. We'll do our best to answer them.
Yes,
sometimes
indeed.
we don't get to all of them, but we will definitely do our best.
Yes.
And Josh.
Yes.
I am today proudly sporting my
you are
Padres sweatshirt and my Padres hat honor of pitchers and catchers reporting today. It is the beginning of baseball season. Yeah.
Okay. See, that is quite interesting. They're like what? I mean, 2 months before. A month before. No.
Yeah, month and a half.
Month and a half.
Yeah.
Oh,
anyway,
wow. Okay.
So, happy pitchers and catchers reporting day.
So the pitchers and the catchers have to report before everybody else.
Yeah,
Like how much before?
I don't know. It's a few weeks, I think.
So it's really that the pitchers need to report, but someone's got to catch the ball.
Exactly.
Oh wow.
So you need
so those guys,
too.
you do need them.
Yep.
Oh, interesting. So, all right.
Should be a fun year.
All right. That's
for the Dodgers.
That's why you're so themed. It will be a good year for the Dodgers. I'm sorry.
No need to apologize. Don't gloat.
No. I actually own a Padres hat.
Okay, good.
And I'm not afraid to wear it, just so everybody knows. So, all right. Well, we've started a new series. You've started, a new series now.
Thank goodness.
we had this great series, Better Together.
Yeah.
And what, four messages. Only four. Could have kept going.
Didn't want to.
That was a hard series.
Yeah, I mean, I think
challenging in a good way, but
like I mentioned before, it was one that we had people request us do some teaching on after the elders rolled out the new position on women in church leadership. And so that was a response to that. And I think some people perceive I was actually meeting with a group of our one of our men's studies today.
Oh, yeah.
And I think right now there's a perception of me in our church body that like this is my thing, right? Like
Yes.
that this is, if I have like one message to give, it's about women in church leadership or mutuality, and that like those things are important to me, but I think they're important to everybody on some level, right?
Yeah.
Whether like their convictions on that. That is definitely not what I would say like anywhere close to my like one thing I would love to talk about is. So
Yeah.
really when it comes down to it, like my message that it's closest to my heart is his way, his heart. That's what I'm all about. Anyway.
Well, if which I know you all listening, if you've heard Ryan talk much at all over the past 5 and a half years, 5.5 years, some 150 messages.
Yeah.
Okay.
Easy.
And there's been 4 now that have bounced around this issue, right?
Yep.
Okay, this thing. One was pretty clear on it, but the other 3 were a bit different.
Yeah.
And in a great way. I loved it. So that percentage is way low on the percentage of messages.
Well, and as I continue to preach, it'll get lower.
It will indeed. It will indeed.
So,
yeah, because
like I said, not that it's not important. It is, and it's important, I think, on both sides, right? For regardless of where you fall, it is important. But it, for me, I had a theology professor who that issue was under every rock for him, and it was just like, oh, dude, I can't anymore. Like, you can't keep finding that behind everything. It's not there.
Yeah,
and so, Lord willing, I think in time people will start to go, oh, like this falls in the same place it did for Paulson before the series. And that place is one of importance, but not one that's explicitly in every single passage that we're going to study. So
no.
Yeah.
No, not at all. And so
we're on to something new.
Okay, tell us about this series.
All right. So this series, and for those who've been around Emmanuel Faith, I love teaching straight through books of the Bible.
Yeah.
That's sort of my go-to. Occasionally I will do a topical series here and there. Mm-hmm. This one is a topical series on apologetics themes. So it's called Reasonable. Mm-hmm. And so we're doing 6 weeks on apologetics themes. So we talked about being prepared to give a reason for the hope that we have this week. This coming Sunday, we're talking about the problem of pain and suffering in the world, talking about the validity of Scripture, the meaning of life, how a loving God could judge and send people to hell, and then science in the Bible, and like, is there a conflict there? So those are the 6 topics. I think it's going to be a fun journey.
It's too bad there's no like big questions in there.
Yeah, no big questions.
Okay, that's a joke.
Yeah.
These are like massive questions. These are like some of the big questions, right? I mean, suffering and evil.
The big question.
That's a very big question. Okay, that's coming up.
I finished my manuscript this morning.
You finished.
So
can you just send it out right now?
Yes, I'll just post it right
post
now.
It on the interweb. No. You have to show up. But that's big.
Yeah.
So you solved it.
Yeah, it's totally solved.
God. Wow! Finally.
Yeah.
Okay. Man, there's so much in that I'd love to talk about. But let's. Okay. The series is called Reasonable.
Yeah. And you know what? Afterwards, I was reading a book this week, Josh, and I read the word unapologetically, and I thought, ooh, that would make a great series title. Also, unapologetically.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I was like a book late to the game there.
But once again, if Mike is watching us, we're talking about things that no one else catches. Why don't we talk about the things that normal people think about? But
it is such a nerdy thing to read a word and go, "Oh, I missed it." It could have been all unapologetic.
Yes.
Anyway.
But that gets at a play on this word apologetics.
Yeah.
Okay. Because apology can mean 2 things.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
And then that's the general kind of category, like you said, that this series is in. I don't know did you end up defining apologetics? Or
yeah, I mean,
saying
just
that?
I would define it as the ability to give a reasoned response.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it
Apologia in the Greek.
yeah. And it sits in there's an academic field of research, of study that is all based around kind of helping to prepare believers to make a defense.
Right.
And so this that's apologetics, but not to be confused with being
Every
apologetic.
message is going to be like, I'm really sorry.
Yeah. Yes. So it's not being sorry all the time. It is giving a defense. Hey, logically, that'd be intrigued in how those words
Fascinating. Yes.
got to be
To you and I.
different. Yes. Let's spend the rest of our time together diving into that, or not.
So, Josh, I read this book.
Okay.
And getting ready. No, this I did.
Well, you did read that, yeah. Sorry.
Called "The Surprising Resurgence of Belief in God" by Justin Brierley, who is a Brit and ran a podcast for a number of years, still does, I think. Interviewed a bunch of people, and wrote this book about what he's perceiving in the general culture of like our day. And it's the whole first part of his book was this fascinating journey of going from like the new atheist movement that was really popular in the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, with guys like Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, and a few others that were like prominent guys. And then sort of the way that the tide started to shift and change. Yeah. And so I talked about the bus campaign in the message, exactly. 2009. Yeah. A group of atheists. There's probably no God.
There's probably no God, right? Yeah.
So what did they say? What's the exact phrase? So relax and enjoy your life. Yeah. So stop worrying. Now stop worrying and enjoy your life. And it was really interesting what happened. And at least in the book, he talks about, and I've talked about that bus ad before. It's a really famous event. What Brierley talked about that was fascinating was that really started to shift in a not in a good way. The conversation more towards faith rather than away from it. There were even some atheists that were originally saying, don't do this. Like, don't get this conversation so much in the forefront of people's minds that it starts to be more of a common dialogue. Okay. When atheists like realized that would be a problem, there were some beforehand. Correct. There were some that were like, hey, pump the brakes. I don't think it's wise for us to go this direction. Okay, so because they were, someone in having a conversation, we should put a billboard on a bus, right? And people thought, no, don't do that because it just enters the conversation into the cultural milieu. Yeah. And then there started atheist churches right? They called the Sunday Assembly, and the liturgy is very similar to like what you would experience in a church. Interesting. And anyway, but then there was this somewhere along the way in like the early like 2010s, there started to be the shift back towards not back, but this shift towards, gosh, if we go all in on the atheist movement, there's some questions that are outstanding that we don't have great answers to. Like some of them are issues of like, what is our ground for morality? Like what is, so you have guys like, and I mentioned two of them that are prominent in the West today who are not Christians explicitly, at least last time I checked. But who are defending Christianity because of its value societally. So that's Jordan Peterson, and then Tom Holland. So Jordan Peterson, Canadian. I think he's a psychologist technically. But he's given lectures on Genesis. He's doing Exodus. He wrote a book on Genesis, right? Yeah. Is that the latest book? Something. And ethics and morality and he is strongly in the camp of like the need for a theistic grounding for society to function in a way that is viable and fruitful. Tom Holland wrote a book called Dominion.
Yeah.
That's just a fascinating chronology of the way that the church grew both in number and influence, and the way that Christianity has influenced everything.
Yeah, I got to admit, I got through, I don't know, halfway through that book.
It's a beast.
Maybe not even half, and I didn't even know he wasn't a Christian, so I kind of assumed that he was. So that's.
He's just a researcher,
and
as he's looking at it, he's going, "My goodness!" So his quote that he says, "In my morals and ethics, I've learned to accept that I'm not Greek or Roman at all, but thoroughly and proudly Christian."
Huh.
That's a fascinating statement, because he's realizing, if we take Christianity's contribution out of society at large, things like the value and dignity of people, things like justice and mercy and love, and like if we strip those out, they are Christian contributions or Judeo-Christian contributions, like what we're left with is not the kind of society that we want to live in.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting.
The tension becomes then, I think it was Mark Sayers who said, "We want the kingdom, but not the king."
Got it. Yes. So they want all the good that comes from having the king.
Yeah.
In a sense. So all the cultural grounding of ethics, like you're saying.
Right.
But
value and dignity of people think about it.
Yeah.
The big wave of like that rugged individualism and express yourself, and even like, which is sort of a secular bent, but all of it's grounded on people matter.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You take that peg out from underneath all of that, and there's no conversation to be had about like the value of the individual or individual expression or anything like that. It's like, well, no, so that's part of the conversation that's going on, and it's really interesting, and maybe is starting to shift the tide back. I think I read somewhere that it's like right now it's like 81% of people in the US would claim to have some sort of like faith,
like a belief in God, in a higher power or something like that. But Tom Holland's quote makes you ask the question, what does it mean to be a Christian, in a great way, because he's saying he's thoroughly and proudly, is that what he said?
Proudly Christian in his ethics.
Oh, okay. So he does in his ethics. All right.
Yeah,
I see. So he doesn't necessarily
his morals and ethics.
Okay. Ooh, wow. All right. Which I wonder. Well, in some ways, there's probably a lot of people who would want to say something like that.
Yeah, and I think that like you could look at it as sort of a progression, right? Like there are people that, man, I mean, like there's even some Christians, and their perspective of faith is, I go to Jesus because of what he can do for me. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
That like I want to get something from him, and I'm gonna like, and I wouldn't say that that's the deepest level of faith.
Well, no.
At all, or the end game, but I do think that at times that Jesus meets us in those places and leads us deeper.
Yeah. And if he doesn't, that at least it can be a problem developmentally and all sorts of things. Because the truth of the matter is, how many people came to faith for another reason other than being scared of going to hell or something like that, right?
Right.
I mean, that's a big motivating factor, especially in the young people that I work with a lot, right?
Yeah.
They're scared of hell. I hear so many testimonies of people, stories of their faith journey, and it begins somewhere there.
Totally.
Now, if it stays there, I think that's a problem.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah.
I think, was it Bernard of Clairvaux that talked about the 4 loves, and that the first level is love of God for self's sake.
Yeah. And I want to say it's St. John of the Cross, but it's one of those. It may be. All right. Hey, there you go. There you go.
Let's Google it.
But
if it is St. John of the Cross, then he was good too.
Yes, right. Yeah,
he's dark now.
I've told it this way. You tell it your way. So let's go with. I mean, so okay, but
so love of God for self's sake.
Yes. For Okay, so the way
or love of God for society's sake,
for joy, maybe they both say something like this.
Yeah.
The way I've heard it is people love God for joy's sake because of the joy He gives us.
Yeah, there's
And so,
some sort of
something there.
hedonistic like longing that we really were meant to be in relationship with God. So there's something very real about that touches a piece of our soul that we were designed for.
Yeah. Okay, the way I've heard it, I'm trying to think if I'm missing one. There's the love of God for love's sake is one of them, and then I know the fourth one, the final one. I just don't. He's gonna pull it up here.
It is Bernard of Clairvaux.
It is okay. There you go.
That was the one I was thinking of.
All right, good.
All right,
good.
So love of God, love of self for self's sake.
Love of self. Okay, so this is slightly different. Yeah, go ahead.
Love of God for self's sake.
Oh, interesting.
Love of God for God's sake. And then love of self for God's sake. So that was his paradigm.
Okay, I got it. So the one
you're going to St. John.
I don't.
It's different.
It may be that. And I'm not going to take your time to. You want to see us Google? This is the Josh and Ryan Google questions they don't have answers to. But this is the part that love of God for God's sake kind of is the end, right?
Yeah, he would say. This is fascinating.
Okay.
So Clairvaux would say it's love of self for God's sake.
Interesting.
Yeah, so
self for God's sake.
The
so
third degree is love of God for God's sake.
The third is.
Isn't that interesting?
So these are two different concepts because the way that I've heard people talk about that no one ever fully grasps and gets to the level of loving God purely for God's sake.
Right.
There's always in this side of the side of heaven, right? And because of the sin nature, all that stuff, there's always some level of selfishness involved.
Yeah, there is
some level of something else, and so we're going to continue to strive, but we won't get there. Okay, now all that
was a really nerdy rabbit trail.
Yes, because we went from Jordan Peterson to Bernard and St. John of the Cross.
I think our point was that throughout history, there have been people that have identified the fact that there is an intrinsic benefit to a Judeo-Christian ethic.
Yes,
that can be purely self-serving at times. Like it's for the betterment of society, but that isn't distinctly Christian in the sense of we are bowing to Jesus as Lord and King.
Yes, exactly. So that gets me to kind of actually where you started the sermon. Okay, you started the sermon with a couple quotes that are famous quotes. Okay, one of them was Friedrich Nietzsche.
Yep.
Who famously said, God is dead.
Yeah.
Now, and I'm no Nietzsche scholar. I did get to study some philosophy enough to be dangerous here. Okay,
perfect. Be dangerous.
There we go. But when Nietzsche said that, he was not saying it with pride.
No.
Like God finally died.
No.
So I think I've seen it on T-shirts even, right? Nietzsche, God is dead, as if to say like, ha ha. But he was sad about that fact for the exact same reason.
Yeah.
He felt like without God to base morality on, that the world would go crazy.
Well, and he was saying it in sort of a prophetic sense. And I'm not using that word technically in a biblical way, but predicting it in the sense that the way that I read him is that human progress, and this is sort of the myth of secularism, is that human progress is going to eventually diminish our need for God to the point that we just won't have any need for God anymore because we'll have progressed so much and we're able to do so much on our own.
Yes.
Who needs God, right?
Yes. So he's actually blaming kind of society.
Yeah.
Like saying you killed God in a sense. And so you've killed him with science, with all this other stuff. You don't rely on him anymore. So he's saying, why do you still hold us to the same morality? Okay. And this is, I think, the same thing that Peterson is struggling with. We need something
that
to
grounding,
base it on.
right?
Yeah.
And we're this weekend we're even going to talk about one of my I think my main point is something to the effect of that the existence of evil doesn't disprove God. It actually proves that God does exist.
Yeah.
And because if we're going to say something is evil or wrong, we have to have something.
Yep.
There's that famous C.S. Lewis quote about like the only way we can know if a line is crooked is we know what a straight line is. You know
exactly. Oh yeah.
And so
that's fascinating.
We'll go there a little bit this weekend.
Yeah. Well, that's really good. And, you know, I think about, man, I don't know if I should. Okay, sometimes here, this once again is a podcast, and sometimes I have ideas, and I think, should I say this?
Just remember, when you're deciding that, we've already talked about Bernard of Clairvaux and St. John.
Yes, we have.
So we have our one rabbit trail.
Here's that. Okay,
we're in chase.
Because part of me wants to know and think, what is it that people base their morality in when it's not God? Mm-hmm. And I think there's a number of things that they do. They tend to be on, well, themselves, their pleasure, what they want. And I think there's a desire these days to base it on something bigger than themselves. And I see a lot of it. This is where, oh man, okay, I'm sorry, I'm gonna say it.
You're gonna go. You're going for it.
Our country right now is dealing with a nationalism push right now, and I think in some ways it's a way to base something morality on something bigger than themselves, which it is bigger than themselves. It's just not as big as God.
It's not big enough.
It's not big enough. Yeah. Because that's where some of the kind of America first mentality can get tricky when you deal with, people that God loves all around the world. It's a tricky thing, and not to say politics, but what that means for ethics and morality and all that stuff. And so,
your first comment about we base it sort of on our own self and conscience. I think of Romans 2, right, where Paul's like, "Hey, you want to base it there? Fine." How many of you have even been able to hold up to your own standard?
Yeah.
He's like, yeah, okay, let's use your conscience as an example.
Yeah.
You want to base morality on your conscience? Great. You're still guilty.
Yeah.
You still haven't lived up to it.
Totally.
Anyway,
totally.
That's a little bit of an aside, but I think the scriptures would recognize the default back to like our sort of intrinsic value system and conscience as one of the ways that we try to define morality outside of God.
Yeah.
But the air that we breathe in the West is saturated by 2,000 years of Christianity that it's hard to disconnect some of those values. Yeah. And I think that's what Holland and Peterson and others are identifying. Anyway,
it's fascinating. They're identifying that when even in the Christian world, people talk about Christianity as something that's just for me. And then people will say, well, that's great for you and it's great for me, but this is my faith that guides me only. It's interesting that it's some of these, secular historian and psychologists who are saying, no, actually we need God, even if we're not going to submit to God personally, but we need God societally. Yeah. And on that part, we'd say yes, we do, but we also need him.
Yeah, personally. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. All right. The other one you mentioned Friedrich Nietzsche.
Oh yeah.
The other one you mentioned, and this is fun. Yuri Gagarin.
Yes.
The first person in space, the first cosmonaut, right?
Yes.
So he was cool, like you said. Let's a little bit.
I specifically said that the first man in space was reported to have said, I went to heaven and I didn't see God.
Exactly. And I caught that you said that because I know what you mean by that. And then I thought this would be a fun thing to talk about here in the podcast because not to give Yuri a bad name, I want to save his
Yuri's
name.
a great name.
It's a great name. But he has been, that quote has been used against him for a long time. But the way that the kind of history shows, it doesn't sound like he ever said that.
He's reported to have
Reported it saying. So they look at the transcripts from the what was he in?
It was 1961.
1961. So whatever there was a name for the ship he was in.
Yeah,
if I was another 20 years older, I'd know that name. But this they have the transcripts from it. Then that's not in the transcripts. It was
you just keep
Khrushchev. It was Khrushchev who, in a like his speech after this, kind of proclaiming the greatness of Russia, that they sent the first person into space
in Vostok 1.
In Vostok 1. Okay, there you go. Way to go. In his speech, he said Yuri went there and saw and did not see God. And he might have said that he said it, right? And once Khrushchev says that, Yuri cannot deny it. Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yuri's stuck, like having, can't deny that he's, he can't say I didn't say that. But the thing is, he probably would never have said,
because he was fairly devout.
He was a pretty devout guy. Yeah. He was, he was a Russian Orthodox. That's really the only church there at the time. But right before he left on Vostok 1, right before he left, he baptized his daughter, kind of as a sign of saying, like, he wanted to have her baptized before he left, knowing how dangerous this was, knowing that he may not come back. And it sounds like he was actually a man of faith. So there you go.
There you go.
Let's just redeem his name a little bit. I can't really redeem Nietzsche at all.
No.
But all right. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about 1 Peter 3:15 a little bit. Huh? And then I'd love to talk about some of these questions that you ended with a little bit. Dive into that. And so here's tell us a little bit about I don't know where you went. What was left that you didn't get to talk about on Sunday?
This idea of I did talk about it, but I don't think that we can overemphasize how important the resurrection was to early Christians.
Yeah.
And I think when Peter talks about always being prepared to give a defense, a reasonable response, to the hope for the hope
have,
that there was that was directly tied to him to resurrection.
Yes,
and I think we can see that in chapter 1. And so the early Christians, we love Scripture, but they didn't have a Bible like this.
Totally.
They had the Old Testament, but it was on scrolls.
But it wasn't like that.
It wasn't. They weren't getting the chance to read it in their daily devotion with a cup of coffee.
No.
So
like a scroll would have been so valuable that there might have been one. They might have seen the scrolls.
Yeah,
and not all of them probably, but they wouldn't have held one. They couldn't read it.
Have you seen the Dead Sea Scrolls?
Yeah.
The exhibit? Fascinating, isn't it?
Absolutely great.
So you're thinking of like your morning cup of coffee and the Dead Sea Scrolls like rolled out.
Yes.
Like it just wasn't. It wasn't happening. So like so much of our faith and our hope is rightly based on what we read in Scripture.
Yeah.
For someone like Peter, though, it's based on the fact that he saw Jesus die. And then he had breakfast with him.
Yeah.
And talked with him.
Yeah.
And that was the crux, pun intended, of his faith.
Yeah.
It was, he was dead and he's alive. And because he's alive, then hope is also.
Yes.
And so there was this sense amongst, when Peter writes to the church, like that kind of hope, when that kind of hope gets in you, when your life gets squeezed, it's going to come out of you.
Yeah.
And so he wanted, like, part of his letter is writing to Christians to say, okay, when that hope is squeezed out of you because it's in you, and life gets hard, make the most of those opportunities.
Yeah.
Like, be prepared. Be like, this is the Boy Scout verse, right? Be prepared to give a reason for the hope that's in you. Like, don't miss those opportunities.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that would be like, I would just want to drive home that point even more, that hope is connected to resurrection.
Yeah. And I like how you talk about how I mean, hope is such an elastic word in English. We use it for everything, right?
I hope the Broncos have a good year next year.
Yeah.
I hope the Padres
Yeah.
can somehow edge out the Dodgers.
I really hope that I win the lottery.
Yeah. Yes.
I haven't even bought a ticket, but I still hope in it somehow,
yeah,
right?
Totally.
Yeah.
It's that feel.
Yeah.
But that wasn't Christian hope. That's not biblical hope.
No.
The best way that I view it, I talked about this on Sunday, so forgive me, but the hope is a confidence in future good that's based on the promises of God and the character of God. So God has said he's going to do certain things, and his character demonstrates his faithfulness and his goodness.
Yeah.
It's a lot, some of it's out there, right? In the future. Hope is pulling that confidence of future good into the present moment, and the present pain and brokenness and all the things, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
It's sort of like having a kite that's flying up there and just like reeling in to life right now.
Yeah. Okay. This is something, hope has been something I've been talking to with a person that's she's been struggling with hope a lot, and some of it is all sorts of health problems and messy stuff we don't have time to go into, but dealing with, like, it's scary to hope again, right? That kind of place. And so we've been talking about what hope is, what isn't. It's got me thinking about this very topic, about what is a compelling hope. Because notice he says, like, people are going to be asking you about the hope.
Totally.
Right. And I worry that I don't get that question a whole lot.
Yeah.
Like, Josh, why are you so hopeful? And okay, so it got me thinking about this, and it's exactly what you're saying, but I started thinking about the object and the subject of hope. Okay, so the object of hope is what it's for, and I think maybe as Christians we think too, like, the object is just me, and like, I know I'm going to be okay.
Yeah,
it's just, I'm fine, or I know I'm going to go to heaven. I heard, I was in the hospital visiting somebody, someone from the church, and the sweetest woman that is just full of faith, and she was talking to the doctors and nurses, the nurse that was there, and she said something like, "Well, I know where I'm going." And it was a statement that was full of hope, but I saw the nurse's face, and the nurse's face was kind of more like, "Oh, isn't that cute?" Because the object was just her, like, it was just her.
Right.
Now, the subject of her faith was God, okay, because God is the one doing this thing. But when the object of the faith of hope is just her, it's not. No one's going to ask about that. Okay, so here's what I started thinking, like, if my hope is not just that I'm going to go to heaven, but I can impact others in the world, and that we as a church can impact.
Totally.
I think that starts being like, oh, whoa. This is what I think Love Esco is.
Yeah, I think so.
I think Love Esco, people are like, oh yeah, I want to be a part of that. Like, tell me about this Love Esco thing.
Yeah.
We hear this a lot. And because I think it's expressing a hope for more than just me, and people are compelled by that.
They are.
And I think we've got to figure out how to live that kind of hope that's more than just me.
Yeah, and would you say that still falls under that big umbrella definition of,
oh, no doubt,
confidence in the future because of the promises of God that we pull into the present?
Yes.
But it's not just for me as an individual.
Yes.
It's bigger than that.
It's bigger.
It's the God who promises, I will make all things new.
Yes.
Empowers his people to bring about renewal in a way that brings hope.
Yes.
Right? Like that's
Absolutely.
all. It seems like all those
Absolutely. Oh yeah,
pieces are connected.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's exactly it. And that's getting at the subject of our hope, right?
I like that. The object and the subject.
Yeah.
That's really good.
Yeah.
That's really good.
I think of like the object of the hope for the Broncos is the Broncos themselves, right?
Yes.
I mean, that's the subject. The subject is that because they're the ones doing the work, right? I guess maybe it also could be a hope that everyone else is terrible.
I like that.
You like that too? But the subject of the hope of me winning the lottery is just in bad math. Just pure luck, right?
Yes.
I don't know. All right. Well, but that's what First Peter is telling us to do, is to always be prepared. And so that's what this series is kind of about.
It is, yeah. It's a way to help people feel like, okay, they're more prepared. But I wanted to start with, all right, the explicit thing Peter says to be prepared for is defend your hope.
Yes.
So
yes,
we wanted to explore that and hopefully give people maybe one phrase or some tools of how they could do that.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about the questions.
Oh yeah,
right?
Yeah, 3 questions,
okay.
And these are from it's our apologetics team here is great.
Yeah.
So I reached out to them a number of months ago and said, hey, here's sort of what I'm thinking. What subjects do you think I should teach on? And are there books I should read? And so they gave me a list of books.
I'm sure they did. Yes.
And one of them was Tactics by Greg Koukl.
Yes.
And I hadn't read that before. And so I read it a while back and it was great.
Yeah.
Really good.
It's good. It's a good book.
So the 3 questions that I said are ways that we can engage people with gentleness and respect, because that's Peter's push, right?
Yes, that's the end of the verse.
Like,
it's part of the verse that sometimes gets skipped. So I'm glad you brought it up, right? Always be ready to give a defense. Let's defend.
Yeah, let's defend. And with gentleness.
With gentleness, yeah.
And I do think that one of the best ways that we can engage with gentleness and respect is through questions.
Yeah.
And because it helps us see why people have landed where they have.
Yeah.
And I think it helps us approach them on their terms.
Okay.
Like, here's the way I envision it. That if somebody comes to my door and knocks on my door and I open up the door and I say, hey, come in, right? Come in, have a seat. Like, my posture is way different than if they like break down my door, right? And come into my house, So I think questions are a way for us to say, will you invite me deeper into your life?
So, but you're not talking like gotcha questions, okay? Right?
No.
Not like, I don't know. I feel like an apologetics, apologists, and sometimes like people that are evangelists that are kind of going out of their way to talk to people that can use questions that kind of are like trying to get people stuck.
Yeah, and I think I do think. So Dallas Willard says that reality is what you run into when you find out you're wrong. And I think that there is a sense of help if people have drawn an illogical conclusion, that there's ways through questions to help them identify that. Okay. But I don't think it's like, gotcha. It's more of like, hey, let's talk about what some better ways are.
Yeah.
And I think the way that we even go there with people is through gentleness and respect, hopefully.
Yeah. But it gets like asking a question isn't going to do the work, or maybe really listening.
Correct. Well, I think that's implicit within asking the question is hopefully it presupposes that we are willing to listen to the answer.
Yes.
In as understanding of a way as we can muster, even if we don't feel like they're quote unquote right, or that we would come to the same conclusion.
Yeah. Can't say like wrong.
Yeah.
I guess
so. My favorite question is, how could you be such a moron?
Right? Yeah. How could you be so stupid? All right.
No, okay. So here's the 3 questions that Koukl suggests in this book.
Okay.
Number 1, what do you mean by that? Okay. So that's a way for people to just dig a little bit deeper and and try to sort of put the burden back on the person who's made a statement to say, help me understand what you mean. And I think it's a good way to for them to clarify and for you to understand too. So the second question is, how did you come to that conclusion?
Okay.
And so that may be through experiences that they've had, which give you the chance to hear their story, maybe books or podcasts or whatever, things that they've, ways that they've learned that, I forget who said it, but it's likely that if you would have had the same experiences that they had, raised in the same way that they were raised, that you might very well believe the same things that they believe.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a sort of a human connection there that's really valuable, that asking that question can sort of lead in that direction.
Yeah. And I guess even, well, what you just said builds compassion on with people to say, oh, I understand where you're coming from, which is a bridge that you're building in a relationship like that. Yeah.
And then the last question is, have you considered? And the way I like to phrase this question, or this sort of category of questions, is even through a statement about, I usually say something like, oh, I've got some different ideas on that. Would you want to hear them? And that's the way to say, are you willing to invite me into your life in a way where you would want to hear what I think?
Yeah.
Because, and this was actually a question that my spiritual director used on me.
He used on me.
And because he's a good spiritual director, he's not just going to like force his like agenda.
Yeah.
So he said to me one time, he's like, Ryan, I have some different ideas about that.
Yes.
Are you interested in hearing them?
I have some different ideas. Are you interested in hearing them?
And I was like,
clearly you said no.
Yeah, exactly. But I can't tell you how many times I've used that question, and like people pause because I don't think they're used to being asked that.
Yeah.
Number one, but two, you really do have to think about, do I want to hear?
Well, it's a gentle way to they can prepare for whatever, it's a confrontation of their beliefs and different, you know.
And I'll usually even say, like, if there's a pause, I'll be like, no pressure. Like, I'm not going anywhere. But if you ever are interested, just know I'd love to share with you.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's how I use that question. Have you considered? But it's more personal for me, like, because I like to own, here's sort of where I've landed on this, and if you're willing to let me into your life, I'd love to share where I've landed.
Yeah.
So that's the way I usually use that question.
Okay.
That group of questions. Yeah.
And so this is now helping people to find the questions. Okay. And I'm just intrigued that here in the passage, it kind of assumes that people are asking, right? But maybe this is a good point. We live in a world where people aren't just asking.
No, and I do wonder. I wonder why, but it does seem as though the persecution that Christians are going to experience is going to be the inciting incident that's going to reveal their hope.
Yeah.
And we don't experience a ton of persecution.
Yeah.
At least in the same way that the early Christians did.
Yeah.
The Christians that Peter's writing to that are he's preparing to live under Nero's reign. And I wonder if that's a dynamic. I'm not saying that it is or it isn't, but I think it might be. So, yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah. So, what do you mean by that? How did you come to that conclusion? And have you considered, or I've got some different ideas about that. Are you interested in hearing them?
Yeah. Well, I love you. You mentioned that you've asked those questions, well, to people, but to one, your barber.
Yes.
Which
my barber, our
barber. I
barber.
know his barber. And then I gotta say,
sorry.
and I'm so glad that you're asking him those questions. This is a guy. He's a wonderful, wonderful guy. And he said so much. I mean, there's been times when I've gotten okay. I remember I was planning a Mother's Day sermon, and it must have been I don't know, Tuesday, Wednesday, and I just was struggling to get the ending right. And I'd worked out the study of it and everything, and he said something that just was like, oh my goodness! I said, can I quote you in that? Because that just summed up what I was trying to say, and it was great. Awesome. And I was able to say that this big guy with like face tattoos says the most loving, like it was the nicest thing, and it just fit so well. He's in this place of asking questions.
Totally.
And so I'm so glad that you're asking him those questions.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, that's great. Well, fun. And I guess this is maybe some of the challenge here for all of us that we need to consider and think about is how can we put ourselves in a situation where we're not the aggressors trying to like convince somebody, instead asking questions, put that in the place of people listening and receiving and being there for people, trying to do that without argument.
Well, and I do think that part of like asking questions isn't just like, okay, I've got these 3 questions and I'm going to cycle through them so that I can eventually get to this. I think being genuinely curious about people's lives and beliefs is part of the secret, quote unquote, the secret, right?
Yeah.
And if we just ask questions to try to get to an end and we don't actually listen to people and we don't see people or value people or enter into their story at all and go, wow, okay, I can see, I'll tell you more about the conversation afterwards with Dave, but just learned so much about his life, and it was really interesting and fun, but also it seems to me that that's the key to the open door for somebody to say, I actually would care about what you think because you've listened to me.
Yeah, that actually matters. So many times I think people have felt used if it moves too fast to what can feel to them as like a salesman tactic. Okay, and that's why I know like the name of Coco's book even was Tactics, as if like, and I know he's not doing that, and I'm sure if it's been a long time since I've read that book, but I'm sure he goes into this.
He does, but I mean, like part of his environment is a little bit different than most of us, right? Yeah. So he's hosting shows where people call in and ask questions about faith. So it's almost immediately it gets into a debate in a sense, and he is giving tactics of how to engage that. But they work in a relational, personal way too, rather than just that like instant debate that he's getting into. So and there's good examples in the book of both.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. Well, I think this is the encouragement for us is to really care enough about people to listen to them where they're at without preaching, without arguing, yet understanding. And then I think it's a great way to say that the way you put the question, not just are you have you considered? How'd you say it again?
I'll usually say something like, I have some different ideas about that. Are you interested in hearing them?
Yeah, I have some different ideas about that. I like it. I like it. I like it. Now, the interesting thing is if your kids will ever say that to you.
Yes.
You want to? Someone
I had some interesting ideas today about whether one of my kids should go to school with a short sleeve shirt on when it's, going to be a high of 53 and raining.
And raining today.
He did not care what I thought. Well, they did not care what I thought to protect the not so innocent.
That's excellent.
Oh man,
that is excellent. Well, okay. So, this week we've got coming up, problem of evil, suffering. How and why can how can a good God allow evil to enter into this world, right? This is one of those where I'm sure you're struggling with. You can raise more questions than answers.
Totally.
In this, right?
Totally.
The week after that?
Week after that is scripture, and is scripture reliable?
Okay. All right, good.
The week after that is, and I actually did some study for this today, meaning and purpose in life. And oh, Josh, I can't wait for the passage I'm preaching on this. It just was like mind blowing for me as I was studying it today. I'm like, oh, I can't wait. Yeah, right. I can't wait.
Okay.
So,
all right. I'm excited.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I look forward to kind of getting together and debriefing those.
Absolutely.
Joining us. We're going to do this as we can. Not sure it'll be every week, maybe every other. Fairly regular. Yes, exactly. We'll do our best to be better than once every 2.5 years. Deal?
Totally.
Deal? Okay.
Deal.
We will do that.
Yes.
Any last words for us? Anything that you want to?
No, I would say that dwell enough on the reality of resurrection to let it get into your soul in such a way that when life squeezes you or just seems like it's spiraling out of control, that hope would just ooze out of you. And I think that I think that was the conviction of the earliest Christians in such a way that it shaped everything. They didn't have a book to be people of, right? In the same way that we do.
Yeah.
They were people of an event.
Oof.
And it changed everything.
Yeah.
So that would be my encouragement.
Okay. I love that. And as you ponder it, as you think about questions that come up that could be in line with one of these topics that you've heard us talk about,
or even one that we don't get to that you wish we did.
If you're listening to us, we're just looking for a tangent. Okay. So we're just looking for that. So
don't let it be Bernard of Clairvaux next time.
Yes, you can help control that and to let us tangent into something that you are interested in. And especially over these few weeks, if there's a question about faith, one that is challenging to you, that has been hard for you, you can ask it. We will be anonymous with with the questions, unless we ask like I did to Mike today. So I told him I'd talk about him. But we will be anonymous. But we'd love to process those. There have been things that we've thought through and worked out, and we can see if we can be helpful. But we want to hear your questions and dive in. So you can.
If we don't get to them now, we'll build the next series unapologetically, and they will be topics that we'll address then.
Yeah, you're gonna have to wait a little while to build another series on this, but yes, maybe just a podcast series or something. Unapologetically, that'd be a good name for a podcast.
It would.
I bet it's out there. But questions@efcc.org is where you can find us. And man, thank you for joining us today, Ryan. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. Yep. Go Padres.
Go Padres, and go in the peace and love of Jesus. Have a great one, guys.